with our mics and stuff. But all right, so let's get to the show, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am joined by my beloved friend and former and colleague in the sector, former colleague at a workplace, Portia Washington. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me. So excited.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about a lot of things within humanitarian international development sector, but largely your experience in the sector being the amazing Black woman that you are. And I thank you for being brave and talking about issues that can be uncomfortable and some people may not want to hear, but we both like talking about these things and think that they're very important for people to hear. So thank you for joining. And to start off this conversation, I wanted to share a little story about how I first met you.
Oh my gosh, I'm scared.
No, I told you this before. This is good because I just want to start off by, oh Lord. I can't even. Mikey just showed me that I didn't have my cord in my microphone and my headphones plugged in all the way to my computer. Humbled. Anyway.
That's okay.
Okay, so I want to start off just giving you so much respect and starting out by how, we know each other. And so to start out, Portia and I both applied for the same job, and we were the last two candidates. And I fucking nailed my final interview with them. Like I did, pulled out all the stops. I had been interviewing. I was like a well-oiled machine. I felt really confident about the interview afterwards. And I went in to where Mikey was and I like jumped on the bed and I was like, oh, it was such a good interview. And I was like, if the other person gets the interview, I was like, they must be a bad bitch because I crushed that interview. So I was like, the other person, if she gets it, like, good on her. She deserves it. And then so I didn't get that job. Portia got it.
I
won! You won! And then a few weeks later, they offered me a different job that I took. And so when I got to the office and I met Portia and instantly realized, I was like, oh yeah, this is the bad bitch that beat me and she's awesome. And you became my comrade in the office.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I'm sorry, Erin. I just realized my battery is gonna die.
Oh Lord.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's all good. It's all good. I have nothing to it's all good. I have nothing to stand on when it comes to technology, as we've seen.
Okay.
Yeah, so Portia's a bad bitch, y'all, and she's done a lot of stuff in the humanitarian international development sector. And if you could just start off giving a little bit about your professional background, just so the audience can kind of know a little bit about what you've done, and then we're gonna really get into your like personal story from the beginning and get into all the good stuff.
So my background is in international development and humanitarian aid. Let me think. I first got interested in working in that field. I was in law school. I was doing a internship at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. And I thought I wanted to do international criminal law, but I saw the investigators who got to go out into the field. They were getting to talk to people and just getting to kind of hear people's stories. And I realized I wanted to be more on that side. So, sorry, I ran to get that after I graduated from law school, I started, applying to those kind of humanitarian aid positions. However, they all required some kind of field experience. I didn't have any field experience, so I joined the Peace Corps, and that really kind of solidified for me that this was the kind of work that I wanted to do. Really learning about somebody else's culture and exactly what a community needed and how I could be of service to them, if at all. So after I finished Peace Corps, I worked for, after I finished Peace Corps, I took some time off because I had a son. So I took about 4 years off to just be home with him. And then I worked I did a fellowship with Catholic Relief Services for a year. And then after that, I went to Rwanda and I worked with Mercy Corps. And my husband and I decided we wanted to come back to the United States for a little while. So that's when I applied for the job at International Rescue Committee, where I met Erin. And
the International what committee? No.
And so I worked there as their economic empowerment manager in Denver. And through a series of events, I no longer work there. But I came at the right time, with COVID and everything, and I'm just pursuing other interests and other avenues, which I guess we'll talk about later. Maybe we'll mention.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, that's kind of the story.
Yeah. So, and where were you where were all your positions with the Peace Corps and then Mercy Corps and all of that?
With Peace Corps, I was in Rwanda, in Gisenyi, which is on the border of Congo. It borders Congo. And with Catholic Relief Services, I was in Burkina Faso, and I was a fellow, but I was managing a project. The project manager got fired, and they were like, "Portia, you're gonna do this now." So I managed an emergency project in northern Burkina Faso, working with refugees from Mali, and then with Mercy Corps, I worked in Goma, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And yeah, that's it.
Great. All right. So that's a bit about your background, which we're going to get into in depth more of like your, different stories within that story. But I want to start out with where you're from, where your family's from, how you grew up, like the people you're around, that kind of stuff, and just sort of set that stage. And, were you exposed to sort of like any kind of community development, whether that was in your own community where you're living or international stuff or whatever?
So I'm from Connecticut. My parents were always like in one way or another very involved in the community, whether it was volunteering somewhere. Like my mom is always doing some kind of volunteer work, so like volunteering at soup kitchens or being active in church, or my mother was on the board of education in the town where I'm from for many years, and my father was a basketball coach for middle school. And so I was always like exposed to, being involved in the community in some way. My mother was a teacher at a women's prison in Connecticut. So there were a few times I got to go to work with her. And that's how I became interested in pursuing a law degree, because it was just always very interesting talking to the students in her class, the women there. They would talk about just their lives in prison, their lives before prison. And I got to kind of seeing, they're like just regular people, and, maybe they have a very long history of committing crimes and getting caught and prosecuted. Or for some of them, it was, they were it was one thing, or they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And you know, they would talk about sometimes how, you know, they wish they had a better attorney, because a lot of them, especially, you know, the minorities, you know, Black, Hispanic women, often have public defenders. And so they would talk about how, you know, their lawyer was okay, but they were overworked, so there was only so much they could do. And so I thought, like, I would like to get involved in this in some way. Um, and that's what sparked my interest as far as going into law school. And
How old were you when you would do that with your mom?
middle school and high school.
Wow.
Yeah. Um, and I was also often always very interested in working with youth or with kids. Um, my I have a very good friend, and she grew up in the foster care system and um, lived at a group home, and so that kind of um, got me curious about working with kids who came from that kind of background. And actually, when I graduated from college, I worked for a year in the group home where she had lived. And you know, even that was probably the best job I've ever had, to be honest.
Wow. Yeah.
You know, like, very fun and very interesting working with these girls. And you know, um I could see kind of the successes that my friend was able to have, even coming from that kind of background. And you know, I know a large part of that was from the people who worked at the group home where she was living, and you know, also from having, you know, friends and the family of her friends being supportive of her. So yeah, those two things, like going to the prison with my mom and talking to the woman there, and then also, you know, having my best friend come from this background of being in the foster care system. Those are the two things I think that have most influenced me as far as what I decided I wanted to do.
So then after high school, did you go straight to college or did you
Yeah,
take time? Yeah.
yeah, I went straight to college.
So, but you didn't study law in undergrad, right?
No, I studied English and French, which
Right.
are
So
like
how did yeah, how did that
well,
how did that all transpire?
um, well, I had wanted to be a forensic scientist, so I went to I went to Emory University, which has like a really good science program. You know, they're right by the CDC. And so I went there with the idea, oh, like, I'm gonna major in biology. I'm gonna, like, be a forensic scientist. And then, so I was started off majoring biology, and then I found out to be like a medical examiner, which is what I really thought I wanted to do. Like, you
Hmm.
have to go to med school, and I was like, that seems like that seems like a lot.
Yeah.
so, so I changed my major, but I wasn't until my junior year that I changed my major
Mm.
to English and French, which, I mean, I thought, like, after I graduated, this, like, is kind of like was a useless thing to major in, but they've both served me very, very well, because you know, I've worked mainly in Africa, in Francophone Africa, and I wouldn't be able to do that if I hadn't majored in French and didn't speak French. And then also, as far as English, you know, the writing part, once I decided to go to law school, that actually proved to
Mm.
be very helpful.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you never know. Sometimes, like, what you think is useless might,
Right. Language. It comes in handy.
yeah, yeah. And at the time, I was like, oh, why didn't I, like, decide to learn Spanish? Like, this
Hmm.
was, you know, not really that helpful.
Yeah.
But yeah, you never know. So
Yeah, I feel like maybe I should have come to French later in life because that was the language I sort of took in high school. And then I
mhm.
took one semester of it in college and was like, oh, I'm so tired of this. I don't want to do this anymore. And so then I switched to sign language. And then I ended up doing like international development kind of stuff where, but we'll get into sign language because this is really interesting that, in like a humanitarian setting, I've never really like utilized sign language. Whereas if I did speak French fluently, I probably, would have had other jobs. But yeah, we'll definitely get into sign language because it is not a universal language,
No.
Which many people think. Okay, so then, you go
So
straight into
then
law school, right? From
I took
undergrad?
a year off
A
after
year off.
college, and I
And
worked
what?
at that group home.
Uh-huh.
And then I went to law school after taking a year off. Um, and I focused mainly on criminal law and um, humanitarian law. And because I thought I had wanted to work as a public defender, so that's why criminal law. But then I don't know how I kind of started getting interested in international law and humanitarian law. But I started thinking, ooh, like there's a way that I can kind of bring these two things together. There's international criminal law. Like I could do it. I could have it all.
Mm-hmm.
And so I applied for this internship. I applied for an internship for the International Criminal Tribunal of Rwanda, but somehow instead I got an internship with the tribunal for the former Yugoslavia.
And who was the internship with it again?
The Office of the Prosecutor. So, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, they're kind of a UN branch, a UN-based tribunal.
Okay.
And so I interned in the office of the prosecutor, which was a really great experience. I had to take a semester off to do it because the school I went to said they wouldn't give me any kind of academic credit for doing that internship. So
what?
I took a semester off and I went and I did that for a semester, and it was a very interesting experience because I mean, it was interesting to see how the Tribunal for Yugoslavia is in The Hague in the Netherlands, very far removed from the ex-Yugoslavia. And so it was kind of interesting to see how they managed that, how prosecutors managed that, and the investigators kind of managed being that far removed. And I always had the question of like, does this tribunal matter to the people who are there? In the case I worked on was based out of Macedonia, so I always wondered, like, do the people in Macedonia like know what we're doing here? Do they care? Does it matter? Like, is it affecting them in any way?
Right.
And that's why I kind of started feeling like I really wanted to do something more on the ground, like more in the community, not so far removed. But it was a good experience because the things that they were working on there, a lot of those issues were things that hadn't really ever come up before in international criminal law. So it was kind of exciting and fun to be a part of that.
Yeah.
And then after that, I graduated from law school. Thank God, took the bar, and that was kind of it for law because I never practiced. So.
Right. So after law school, this is really interesting. Yeah, I'm sure all of your like cohorts and stuff were planning on like where they're going to take the bar and whatnot. And when did you start coming to this decision that you were going to apply? I mean, obviously, like after Yugoslavia or after you worked on the tribunal where you're like, yeah, I am going to go abroad somewhere. I'll figure it out. Or
no, I wasn't. So after that, I was still thinking, oh, well, I still would like to work as a public defender because one of the attorneys there, I had met him. I had done an internship like my second year in law school, I think, at the Legal Aid Society of New York. And when I got to the tribunal for Yugoslavia, for the former Yugoslavia, there was an attorney there who had also worked there at Legal Aid in New York. And I had met him when I interned there. And so he was like, like working as a public defender, if you want to do this kind of work, in international criminal law, is a pretty good foundation. So I was still thinking I wanted to work as a public defender and do that for a few years. But I applied, but I didn't get a job there. And so after that, I was just like, ugh, that was like my only plan. Like I didn't have a plan B. And so I just thought, well, I don't have to have worked as a public defender to work in humanitarian aid. I wasn't really sure that I wanted to like work as an attorney in the first place because, I had already started thinking I wanted to do something more like in communities. Mm-hmm. So I applied to join the Peace Corps so I could get more field experience. And I was supposed to get sent to Senegal, but then they, at the last minute, changed and I got sent to Rwanda.
All right, so let's get into your experience being a Black woman and making the decision to do Peace Corps. And, you've talked about like you grew up, your family valued community and, mm-hmm. Uplifting community and doing your part. Mm-hmm. And we talked before how when you said that you had made the decision to go to Peace Corps and stuff, people in your family were like,
yeah. Well, my mother was supportive because I feel like my mother's kind of, I don't know if she's actually adventurous, but she doesn't mind like going out and doing things. My father, however, when I was like, oh yeah, like I applied to the Peace Corps, he didn't say it to me, but he said it to one of my aunts, like, why does she want to do that? Like, she's not some rich white kid. And I think there is an idea that Peace Corps is mainly something that rich white kids do, because I don't know why. It's been historically, I guess, mainly white kids who have been Peace Corps volunteers. And even when I was a volunteer, there were, in Rwanda, I think about 100 volunteers or so, and there were maybe 10 like African American volunteers. So it's still, I don't think, is something that really a lot of Black students end up doing, but mm-hmm. I still wanted to do it anyway. So.
Yeah. What were your feelings around it? Like, given the racial dynamics and history and everything, and just you hadn't been to Rwanda before, like kind of what were you thinking and feeling prior to going there?
Like that aspect didn't really cross my mind. I didn't think about that at all. But when we had our orientation and I saw like it was me and then another girl who in my group were the only 2 Black females, and then there was another a guy who was also Black. So when we had orientation and I saw her, I was kind of like, oh, thank God I'm not the only one. But it hadn't really crossed my mind, like, oh, like I might be the only Black person. Like, how will that affect, what my experience is? I didn't think about that at all. It kind of wasn't until we got to Rwanda and we had been there, I think it was 2 months of training. So it wasn't until then, like the in-country training, that I started to see like, oh, like our experience is different than the white volunteers, and not always necessarily, in a bad way, but it was different. And when I would talk to the other 2 Black volunteers in my group, they kind of expressed the same sentiment that, yeah, things are different. Like, for example, and I think this happens in a lot of African countries, like sometimes people don't see white people very much. So there's a word in Swahili, and they use it in Rwanda too, Mzungu.
Mzungu. Girl, I know that.
So, like, the white volunteers, when they would go out, people would be like, Mzungu, or kids would be like following them, Mzungu, Mzungu. And like for us, the black volunteers, we didn't have that, which to us, like, that was a problem to have like a group of kids following you, yelling, Mzungu, 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 give us money. And my friend, this girl she was also like one of the other black volunteer, she would sometimes be like, oh yeah, like I cannot walk with the white volunteers because I can't deal with like people constantly like following us. So there were aspects of that, of being like a black in that setting, that had advantages. And also I think that people were maybe more open in talking to us, just because I guess we have that in common. So I think certain things that they wouldn't talk about to the white volunteers, they were more open about talking to us, especially things like concerning the genocide and their story surrounding the genocide. I for sure think that people were more willing to talk to us about those things. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you start to learn, I know we talked about you speaking French, but did you start to learn any language in Eastern DRC or Rwanda? Did you learn Kinyarwanda?
Yeah, so that's
Yeah.
part of your training,
Mm-hmm.
your 2 month in-country training, you learn the language. So, yeah, I learned Kinyarwanda, but honestly, like, it's never, Kinyarwanda was never very good. And when I got to my site, so I ended up living in Gisenyi, which is in North Kivu. And what I ended up doing was I ended up working with deaf children. So I had to learn sign language. They used American Sign Language. So I was kind of like, well, I can't concentrate on this Kinyarwanda anymore because that alone is really hard. And now I have to like also learn American Sign Language. So I focused mainly on learning ASL so I could be able to, communicate with the kids I was working with.
Mm-hmm.
And since where I lived in Rwanda was on the border of Congo, like a lot of people spoke French, and Rwanda at one time was like a francophone country. They've now like switched to English, but so I was able to get by like with my kind of struggling Kinyarwanda and French, and for most of my day I used ASL anyway. So, but I wish I knew Kinyarwanda better. I wish I hadn't been so lazy about it. Because it would have been helpful. I mean, my husband is Rwandan. Like, I ended up marrying a Rwandan. And
Right.
so, like, in hindsight, I'm like, I like should have probably learned it better. Just to be able to communicate with his family better. I mean, I can communicate with them in French, and some of them speak English, but
Mm-hmm.
my mother-in-law, she doesn't speak French or English. And so when I'm speaking to her in Kinyarwanda, she's just like laughing, or she'll be like, say to me in Kinyarwanda, when are you going to learn Kinyarwanda? I know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, do your kids speak it?
No, they know some and they understand like a little bit, but no, they don't speak it because my husband doesn't really, he'll say some things to them in Kinyarwanda, but it's mostly like when they're doing something they're not supposed to be doing. My kids speak French though, and when I was working in DRC, we lived in Rwanda in Gisenyi, like where I had been a volunteer, which was kind of cool. And my older son, he started learning Kinyarwanda then. They both did, like playing with their cousins, and but now since we're back in the U.S., it's kind of like gone. So.
Um, all right, so let's go back to, you first coming to Rwanda. Did you, um, And you ended up staying there and marrying a man from there. When you got there, did you have any sense of like, because we've talked before about the quality of life is
Mhm.
better in a lot of other places we've been than the United States.
Yes.
And so I'm just kind of curious, did you have sort of like a sense of home or like belonging when you got there, just like you felt good,
Yeah,
you
for
know?
sure. Like even now, I still feel like that's my second home. I just feel, I don't know, so like comfortable and relaxed there. I don't know, maybe it is like the quality of life. Things are not always so rushed, even like if you live in the city, you're not rushing around as much. And um yeah, there's just, I felt more of a sense of community. Like my neighbors, when I was a volunteer, my neighbors knew like I was some like American kid who was there like living in the same, compound as them. And they would definitely look out for me. And so I just felt a lot more sense of a community there than I do living here.
Mm-hmm. And then when you had your kids, was that increase like the with child raising and in the community and stuff like that?
Um, yeah, I mean, I felt like it was easier to raise a child there, but that comes with a lot of other different things. Not only like a sense of community, but well, I did feel that because I knew, for example, other people were kind of also looking out for my kids in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, one day I was walking with my kids and I was kind of like rushing, and my kids, they're little, so they walk so slowly. And I was just like, ugh, I can't like, like walk slowly with you guys. And I walked ahead of them. And then there was a guy behind them and he yelled to me, "Why are you leaving your kids?" Like he was looking out for them. And I was just like, because they're walking, thought to myself, because they're walking so slowly, I can't do this anymore. But yeah, I mean, and that's just is really nice. I don't think that there's that same sense of in the United States, everybody's kind of looking out for kids. Like if you see someone's kid acting up in the store, you're not going to say to that kid like, stop doing that, because their
Mm-hmm.
mom will turn around
Yeah.
and turn on you and be like, don't talk to my kid like that.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Whereas there, if they see like a kid's upset or acting up, then they'll say something,
Mm-hmm.
um, they'll say something like, "Oh, what you're doing is not really good," or "Oh, when we were in Burkina Faso, the thing people would say was like, "Oh, you're nice, right? You're nice. Okay, you're being nice."
Oh.
And that just is like, I don't know. As a parent, it just feels good to have that.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, that's something, in terms of like talk about cultural dynamics and refugee resettlement where we've worked, that's always a really sad thing to kind of have to explain to people when they come here.
yeah,
Because when I was in Gisene too, and with my friend who's from Eastern DRC, and I saw kids kind of like running around, and like,
hmm,
there's all sorts of course, like adults around as well. And he was just like, yeah, everybody looks out for each other's kids,
yeah,
everybody. And I just thought it's just such a sweet notion of just seeing a child and knowing that like this is sort of a collective responsibility also to ensure like future generations have love and support
yeah.
kind of and they're so open about it. And
Mhm.
then when people come here, we have to explain like, especially it's really hard for mothers like or a single, whoever is the primary child rearer. It's very
Mhm.
difficult to be like, it is your sole responsibility now to raise
Nobody was
these.
going to help you
Yeah.
raise this kid. Yeah, I
Childcare is really expensive. Nobody else is going to look out for your kid because they're afraid of like the police or authorities or
right.
you or whatever.
Yeah.
And also, like, just even like allowing your kids to play outside and having to kind of
Mhm.
explain, like, you can't really go so far. You have to be a certain age, like all,
Yeah.
be careful of this and that. Like it just,
Right. That
because
was
some,
something that was a big adjustment for us actually when we came back to the US. Because like in Rwanda, the kids would like trail behind me. I wouldn't like worry too much. And when we were getting ready to come back and we would go out somewhere, I would start saying to them, okay, like, you have to stay close to me because when we go back to the US, like, you can't just be all the way over there and I'm here because somebody could kidnap you. Not to say that people don't get kidnapped, there too. And in DRC, that definitely happens. But um, and when we were in Rwanda, I didn't worry so much about like, ugh, they have to be like right next to me.
mhm, mhm.
Um, so that was like a big adjustment for them. And even now, they're still like, also just because they're kids, but wandering. And I'm like, hey, like you have to come because somebody will grab you here. like, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And the other part that made it, and this is maybe something different, but that I felt made it easier as far as raising kids overseas was that you're able to often have somebody be helping you like at the house. So whether it's like a nanny or someone who's helping like with cooking and cleaning, and that also like takes a really big burden off, especially like if you're a working parent, then just makes it a lot easier for you to be able to um I guess enjoy your family and enjoy,
Mhm,
your children because you're not like trying to do everything.
mhm, mhm.
Like you're going to work, you're cooking, you're cleaning, you're trying to take care of your kids and play with them when they're asking you to, if you'll play with them. So it just allows for like more time to kind of enjoy the people in your life and appreciate that a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, I mean that's that quality of life.
Yeah.
When you're not rushing around everywhere and you
Yeah.
have resources and time available to like take time for your family and yourself.
Mhm. And even like if you're not in a position where you can afford to have help, like there's still, because there is such a sense of community, like somebody, a neighbor or somebody else will, help in some way. So yeah, I just like really, really like it. And I definitely feel like Rwanda is a second home for me and for my kids. Like we really enjoyed our time there. And I was so glad that we had the opportunity to go and be there and that my kids could experience it too, and get to know their Rwandan family better. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, if we had the chance to go back, then I would go.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so let's go back to you. We'll stay with you being in Rwanda, um, but yeah, a few things. One, I just want to say I like pointing out the positives of other countries, particularly countries that people may not associate with higher quality of life. And that's not to say that countries don't have their issues, because every country government is corrupt on some
Right.
level and there's always bad shit that's happening. But I definitely think it's important to recognize, give credit where credit is due. And there's
Mhm.
definitely a lot of cultural values and cultural frameworks that are, I think, superior in other places.
Yeah.
And I think that's something we have to be real about, especially like in an international development setting, because,
Mhm.
Peace Corps, all of these type of projects, we have to always question, like, why are we going over there? What are we
Mhm.
doing? And so I kind of wonder what your personal journey is with that. Sort of like what you thought about Rwanda prior, when you got there. How
Uh-huh.
did things sort of shift for you and your perspective of like humanitarian aid and how we should help each other?
Mm. Well, like prior to going, I didn't think anything. Like I didn't know anything. I didn't do any research before going. I was just like, I'm going.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just
I
showed
think
up.
that's typical. I honestly, before I went to Northern Ireland, I did not know that it was a separate country. I thought it was all Republic of Ireland, one. And
Oh.
this is a huge thing because it's the whole like civil strife. So it was really
Right.
ridiculous. I didn't know that, but
That would
obviously
have
I
been a
learned
good thing to know.
yeah. Well, I looked, obviously I did look it up prior, but then, and realized kind of a bit was going on. And then I ended up studying at doing some peace and conflict research there and learned a lot more about the situation. So I tried to remedy it, but
But
anyway,
I think
yeah.
it's sometimes good to go in just like without any kind of preconceived ideas. Um, so I was glad that I like hadn't really researched very much before going because I think I would have um I don't know, I think I just would have had like a lot of preconceived ideas about the country that would have changed my initial like reaction to being there. Um but yeah, getting there when I first got there, I mean, my first impression was that everybody's very friendly, like everybody seems very very open and warm. But then the longer like I was there, over the course of like my 2 year Peace Corps service, and then even like just being there, when I was working with Mercy Corps, like I started to see more and more, like people are very friendly and kind, but I could see more and more kind of like the effects that the genocide had on the way people interact with each other and how much people trust each other. Um, like I could definitely see kind of the negative effects that had on them because initially you go to Rwanda and it's like pretty well developed, like it's super clean, it's nice, and so you would think like, oh wow, like they came out of this horrible situation, like they came out of it very well, but like the longer you're there, like you can kind of see the underlying effects that I don't think people discuss very much. And even having been there, having had been there for 2 years when we went back, um, there was still like a lot that I hadn't realized was going on under the surface. And like for example, when I was looking for someone to watch my kids and we were staying with my sister-in-law, like we found somebody and my sister-in-law helped me like interview her kind of, and I asked her like, what do you like think of this person? Do you think she'll be good? And my sister-in-law was like, yeah, well, do you see like the person we have working for us? Does she look like us? Like she's like basically saying like she's not like us, but this person who you're looking at to take care of your kids is, and she won't let anything bad happen to them. And when she said that, I was kind of like, wow, like this is still something that I didn't realize was kind of so much still in people's minds, I guess, when they're considering like the relationships they have with other people. Um, but for sure, it's there. And even, one time my husband said to me, like Rwandans, like we're trying our best to live peacefully and to not have any issues, with ethnicity and to accept each other because, we want our country to grow and develop, but it's hard to trust each other. So I guess like, when I first got to Rwanda, I didn't see that, but the longer I was there, it becomes more and more apparent. And um that's like the one thing that kind of always concerns me, I guess, is that there's kind of like a facade. It seems okay, but like you can see like peeling away the layers that it's really not completely okay.
And I think that's akin to some people's version of America. I think some
Mm-hmm.
people, still have a very rosy picture of the United States,
Yeah.
less so probably the past 4 years because most people have been anti-Trump and been kind of like honest about America's shortfalls in some
Mm-hmm.
ways. But, you know, being a black woman from America, how does just this all play out sort of like the culture of racism in America and then the culture, you know, racism in Rwanda, and sort of like how you feel in both, or maybe how you feel similarly or differently in either in both settings.
Well, I think initially, like during my Peace Corps service, I definitely felt like, oh, like being, a Black American, it's kind of better for me here because I'm not experiencing any racism because everyone else looks like me. um, so, like, I don't have that issue. When I went back, I kind of discovered, like, okay, the issue wasn't racism, but I could see how I was treated differently than like white foreigners who were there. So, for example, I had gone into Congo with a friend of mine who was a white American, and we were buying fabric. And, in Rwanda, like, you're not really allowed to they don't really like you to buy things in Congo and then, or, Uganda or wherever, and then bring them into Rwanda because they want you to buy, local. So we had bought this fabric and we're crossing the border back into Rwanda, and they like let her go, and me, they stopped me, and they were like, you're trying to like bring this fabric back so you can sell it. And I was like, no, like I'm American. I'm bringing it because I want to gift it to my family. And they're like, no, we know you're going to sell it. And I was like, no, like, really, I'm not. Like, I'm American. I'm going to bring this back to the United States. And they were like, no, you're not American. And I had to go into, like, some small, like, room and take out all of my things, show them my passport. Even then, they still were, like, doubtful.
Really?
Yeah. And so that kind of, I guess, surprised me a little bit.
Yeah, what would you call that?
Like that they like let her go, and like even me, I was like, I have a passport, I am American. Yeah. And even then they were doubtful. And then I had another experience where I had like kind of an altercation with somebody, one of the like immigration people at the border, where the document that I used to cross had ripped and he like wouldn't accept it. And so I was like, okay, like, went and bought tape, fixed it. And as I was crossing, when I walked by him, he said I had stepped on his foot, and he slapped me in the face. And
are you serious? Wait,
yeah.
This is at the border station?
Yeah.
The guy slapped you in the face?
On the Rwandan side, yes, and slapped me in the face. And was like, you stepped on my foot, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I didn't like step on your foot. Like, I'm now like have fixed what you wanted me to fix. And like, I want to go home. And I had been driving with two colleagues from Mercy Corps. And they were in the car still crossing with the car. And I was crossing like on foot so I could show like my documents. And like, it became like this big altercation, like a screaming match. And like, the police there were like looking at me, and they're like, just go. And I was like, I'm waiting like for my friends who are in this car. I'm just going to stand here and wait. So 2 things came from that. I mean, I hadn't really to me, like at that time, I was thinking like this guy is just an asshole, I was recently telling this to a friend who also works in, I don't know why I'm buying this, who also works in international development and has worked like in international development and humanitarian aid for, many, like her whole career. And she is white. And when I told her this, she asked, like, do you think that would have happened to you if you had been like a white woman? And when I thought about it, like, no, like, I don't think that would have happened to me if I had been like a white woman. I don't think that like the person at the border would have slapped me in the face and felt like that was okay, Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then the second thing that came out of that was that the 2 colleagues from Mercy Corps, when I got in the car, yelled at me and told me that I should not have started that altercation, that Lord. I should have just like done nothing, and that I had also implicated Mercy Corps now because I had pointed at the Mercy Corps car. And they were like, we like work very hard to have a good relationship with the people at the border, and when you're doing that, like you could put that in jeopardy. And I was like, well, I didn't slap him in the face. Like, he, and I'm supposed to just do like what? So I was surprised also that like I got no support from them. And I don't know like what I was expecting, like in terms of support, but not for them to turn around and like place the blame
Blame
on
on
me.
you.
Yeah.
Jesus.
So are some like I can see like differences in the way that I'm treated. And it's not always negative. Like really it was only maybe those two times that it had been like a negative difference that I saw,
But
but
those are big instances,
yeah.
especially when it comes to sort of, I mean, like you're at border crossings both times. Those are kind of inherently sort of not scary experiences, but a little
Mhm.
like adrenaline because sometimes you just don't know like what could happen. And then for
Right.
that, especially if someone does stop you and just kind of question, your documents or whatever, that's a little
Mhm.
bit because, you have these like horror stories in your mind of what could go wrong.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, to be slapped, geez.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't think that would have happened if you were white. And, the other instance where the white woman was allowed to walk ahead.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Whew. I'm sorry
And
that
also
that
because
happened to
they don't
you.
know from looking at me that I'm not Rwandan, like to
Mm-hmm.
them I could
Mm-hmm.
be Rwandan or I could be, Congolese. Like they don't know until I open my mouth and say something. And even then, like they're still like dubious about my where I come from.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that part is like after that, like it was always I always felt like not really quite comfortable.
Yeah, and I mean, how can you reconcile that with the white colleagues at Mercy Corps, just Mercy Corps in general, and make them realize that, like, your brand is not more important than one of your employees getting slapped in the face by a patrol, or by
Yeah,
a border
right.
personnel.
But
So,
that like months and months later, I still would see that same guy every time I would when I would cross. And like a couple of months later, I he was, stamping my documents and he apologized and he was like, that wasn't right. Like I'm sorry. But I
well,
still like
that's nice.
yeah. And then
Did
that was also surprising.
Yeah. Did you get an apology from your colleagues?
Oh no. I did not.
Well, that's
No.
probably another level of racism right there.
But that also taught me as far as NGOs, and I guess I had learned this a little bit even before working at Mercy Corps, but I think like, people see like these ads for NGOs on
Yes.
TV. IRC has one that I see on YouTube all the time, and they think, oh, like they're helping people. Like their main priority is to help people. But that taught me like solidly that like really they're also looking out for their interests first, you know? Even when it comes to their employees, like they need to protect their interests first and foremost. Like their first priority, like they're trying to help people, okay, but
Mm-hmm.
their first priority is to protect the to protect the interests of the NGO first.
Yeah.
And that was a good lesson. Now I know.
Yeah. Well, I think you know that doubly now, right? I
Yeah.
think yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so it's 11:30 right now. We're going to keep chatting. There are some people that have commented. I just want to shout out my friend Rana in Egypt and my friend Ompile from back in the day from Botswana. Shout out. And my cousin Rebecca. Thank you. Just want to shout out those people for tuning in. We definitely will take comments and questions if anybody has any. So I just wanted to say that because I hadn't said it yet. So yeah, so Mercy. Oh well, let's just talk. Where should we take it from here? Um, what were some of your? I think because you've sort of told me what were some of your experiences though while you were in either Rwanda or Burkina Faso where, and you mentioned this already, that people there felt more comfortable with you talking about more vulnerable issues than the white Peace Corps volunteers and people that were there. Were there any other things that were confided in you about the organization, or just like the humanitarian apparatus that people confided in you that were unsatisfied, whereas maybe the white people were more oblivious to that, or didn't have, weren't having those conversations? Yeah.
I didn't really have that too much at like Catholic Relief Services, where I was working in Burkina Faso. And I think, well, in both places, like the majority of the people who worked there were like, were Burkinabe. So, and there were only like maybe 4 expats, I guess. So I think like that kind of dynamic made it so that there wasn't like a lot of tension in that way. But when I worked at Mercy Corps, like I could immediately see like there was a problem. And the some of the like my Congolese colleagues would make comments to me about like the white expats who worked at Mercy Corps in Goma, and would say things like one time, I was in the car with one of the drivers and was chatting with her, and she was like, "Oh, like the other Mercy Corps like employees or whatever, who are white, like can't even be bothered to like talk, can't even be bothered to like chat in the car, and like will just sit there silent on their phone." And she was like, like white people are like not correct, like that's not right. And I was kind of like, oh, like that's
true story.
Yeah. But I had up until then had been thinking like I had thought I saw something like that, but wasn't sure. Because this was when I first started working there. Like I would see white colleagues in line at the border and would be like, "Hey," and they wouldn't say anything back. And I thought, well, maybe they don't know who I am. They might not know who I am. And then after a while, like they did start to kind of speak, but never like quite warmed up to me. I saw it in the way that they were warming up to each other. And then I had another Congolese colleague say something similar, where the director of emergency programming, he was asking me something about like if she had told me something about one of the projects we were working on. And I was like, no, well, she doesn't really talk to me, she doesn't really talk to me like that. So no, she didn't tell me anything. And he was like, why shouldn't she tell you? She was like, he said, that's just pride. Like, and he also said, white people are not correct. Like she comes here and she's just prideful. And, and he's like, they're all like that. They just think that they're better. And, like the longer I was there, the more I saw, like, yes, that was the case. Like there was not really any mingling, like the white expats were not really like mingling with the Congolese, their Congolese colleagues, like really almost at all. But, for certain higher positions, they would hire someone who was Congolese and be like, but look, like we're hiring a local for this higher position. Like we're not racist or discriminatory. And it just seemed kind of false,
Yeah. So there's the attitude, the essentially colonized mind, that to some extent we're kind of all have, because, we all to some extent have been kind of colonized. Yeah. And I think, so yes, people do definitely, white people have that attitude of like, and I mean, this is what the system is built for. That's why I want to talk about this, is like, the system is almost like designed to make you feel good.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's set up like, we're good, they're bad, we're rich, they're poor, we're right,
Mhm.
they're wrong.
Yeah.
So we're going to go in and, make it right,
Yeah.
essentially. And um, that's why, again, why I think it's important to bring up like different cultural values and like positive things and just show like the error of American exceptionalism. And just even if American exceptionalism didn't exist, we need to question just the very fact of like, why are we going in other countries to help or do this or say, just like
Yeah.
think that we have all of the right ideas when we don't know what the hell is going on over there.
Right. And I mean, that is kind of how it's set up because it's not so like, in Peace Corps, like you're supposed to go, you spend 2 years there, you learn about the culture, like you become part of the community. That's like the idea of what it should be. But like when you're working, in development or humanitarian aid, like when you go there, like you're there to do a job. So you don't have time really to like dig deep into like the culture and like to really integrate in the community. Like there's just like you don't have that same luxury. So you can go in not knowing as much as you should know. And because of that, sometimes not being as effective as you could be and maybe doing more harm than good, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think cultural knowledge is so important and something that I think most humanitarians lack. Like in refugee resettlement, you're working with people all over the world, so many
Mhm.
cultures, ethnicities, like, and the amount of people different cultures were exposed to versus the amount of information given, history information, political information, whatever about the people that were trying to assist is very slim. And I think overall that's very hurtful. And most people want this information. Like, we
Right.
believe in like global solidarity and want to work
Mhm.
together, but like
Yeah.
we also need time to kind of understand one another.
Right. That's
Um,
very important. I was surprised when I started working in resettlement that that wasn't something that happened regularly, that there weren't like regular kind of updates about what the situation was in the different countries that our clients come from. Because like I didn't know very much about, what the situation was in, I don't know, in Burma and like why people were fleeing from there. And so I was just kind of surprised that there wasn't some kind of like regular briefing about what the situation was. So it felt like we were working kind of without any context sometimes because knowing that does make a difference in the way that you assist people and the way that you're able to build relationships with them. And so I feel like you can't be as effective in doing that. Like these people are coming as refugees here and they're just expected to trust us because we said that they're going to
right.
help them. We don't know anything about like where they're coming from or what their situation was. I think it's just not doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, the lack of cultural exchange and humanitarian in general, especially refugee resettlement, it does not go both ways. It's really like, this is our culture. Let us tell you all about it. And
Right.
we're not really concerned about what you've got going on. I
Yeah.
just want to shout out. Oops. Sorry, I almost unplugged my microphone. I just want to shout out Alus, fellow MIDP. He says, I hear you, Portia. I can see how being an African American PCV in Africa could be both an advantage and a disadvantage at the same time.
Hmm.
So shout out to, that's my friend Alus from grad school. He is from Mali. Um, can you tell me what PCV means? An American PCV in Africa?
Peace Corps
Peace
volunteer.
Corps, thank you. See, I'm not a Peace Corps volunteer, so I don't know those acronyms. My friend Rana from Egypt says, Portia, I'm sorry. I am sorry to had to go through such a harming accident at the airport, but glad you overcame this and were stronger. Um, yeah. Whew. I can't, that's amazing that he apologized later. That's That's nice.
Yeah.
I mean, because it's such an extreme situation like that. Like you probably wouldn't expect an apology. So good on. I mean, bad on him for slapping, but good on him for
But at
saying
least he
sorry.
apologized. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Unlike those white girls who are like, it's your fault for getting slapped.
Yeah. And only one of them was white, one guy, and then the other guy was Kenyan. He was black. But I was still surprised, like, I don't know. That's just how it is. It's fine. Now I know, so it's okay.
Yeah. Oh, also, okay, sorry, Brooke, your comment was up at the beginning. I didn't see it, but I gotta shout out my sister, Brooke. She says, "What up? No shout out." And I just want to point out, she says, "I've been watching since the beginning while multitasking, cleaning, cooking, and watching kids because I live in the US and don't have help."
Yes.
So shout out to you, Brooke, for doing all of that.
Yes, it's not easy. When we first, like, when we came back to the US after being in Burkina, and when we came back after being in Rwanda, both times I was like, oh my God, how do people do this? Like, it was like a reverse culture shock. Like, I have to do all of these things.
Yeah, yeah. I remember when we were talking to one of our mutual friends, and she was like, something like, "What, it takes you like all day to cook and clean or something?" And we both were like, "Yeah." Like, I don't even have any kids, but dude, if I'm cooking and cleaning, that will take me all day.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, so shout out to people that are doing it with kids.
No, not easy.
Yeah. Um, yeah, okay, so we're so many shout outs. Thanks for all the shout outs. Uh, oh, that's interesting. It came. Sorry, I'm just trying to keep up with the comments. Okay, so all right. Well, I guess if, do you have any, it's been like an hour, 15 minutes. Do you have any other things that you want to talk about? Anything that we didn't get to that you think is really important about your experience that you just think people should know and be aware of? Because, and again, thank you so much for sharing your experience and being on here. And I think your experience is so, important for a multitude of reasons. But one, I think being from the United States and being black and in these spaces is like a double rarity and and it's so important because I think that there are so many white women in the West in these humanitarian spaces that want to focus on international stuff and want to turn a blind eye to what's going on in their backyard. And I think there's a lot of racism on that level that I find really weird with black populations. Like I've seen white colleagues act certain ways towards black Americans that are different to black people from Africa.
Yes. That is true. And that's something that I've only just learned or noticed, I guess, this past year. Because somebody else pointed it out to me. I don't know that I would even notice like on my own. But yeah, there is a difference in how I think white Americans treat like African Americans versus like Africans who come to the United States, because they're thinking of them as like, oh, like you're a refugee, or oh, you're an immigrant. So maybe not thinking of them as much of a threat in some ways as they do like African Americans, Black Americans. And I'm not like really sure why that is. I mean, I don't think that's something that I can answer because I'm Black. I don't know what the reason is for that, but it seems like because maybe like they're viewed as less of a threat. And I wonder if like they're viewed as less of a threat because maybe white people are thinking, oh, well, like they came from over there, like where there isn't very much. So automatically, like they're less than.
Wait, wait,
I,
wait. Are you saying you think white Westerners, white Americans are thinking black Africans are less of a threat because
yeah, that black Africans who come are less of a threat because they're thinking like, oh, they've come from somewhere where like there isn't very much, like they're coming from a developing country, and so for that reason, like they're not on the same level as us, and so they're not as much of a threat.
yeah,
I don't know.
I think there's definite layers of power and balance. Like we were talking about at the beginning, it kind of makes you feel good. I think everybody wants to feel good. Everybody wants to contribute. And that's good. We should like optimize people's good intentions and goodwill.
Mhm.
But I do, I think this is such an important conversation because I think we as white people need to recognize how we're feeling and treating black people from the United States and black people that are not from the United States in terms of like this power, our preconceived notions. And I think the word you used, threat, is really interesting because yeah, like a white person from the United States is like, it's much harder, I think, for a white person to go in like a black community here and be like, because I don't know. I don't know what it is. I don't know if people think it's like some sort of like fresh start or like they're already seen as the enemy here in the United States. So like maybe I'm seen as less of an enemy. And what you were saying about the treatment of white people overseas, how like the lady was just able to pass by and, people are like, Mzungu, Mzungu.
Yeah.
There's, I think people get like high off of that, and yeah, I think, that's an easier situation for a white person to be in a helping situation than a white person going to like prison system or whatever with largely black and brown Americans.
Mhm.
I think people just feel like out of their comfort zone. And we need to, like I said, we need to talk about that. We need to question it and recognize that all of these corrupt systems kind of stem from slavery, colonization. All of these things are manifestations of, yeah, colonial imperialism, essentially, just taking different shapes. And so I think we need to kind of zoom out and see that we all are in this, the broader picture we all hold or are in.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think sometimes that as far as like working in refugee resettlement or just working in humanitarian aid, like in general, I think that people are sometimes less willing to see the possibility that there's racism even within that system and discrimination even within that system, because you're thinking, oh, like these people are going to Asia and Africa and Latin America helping people, and if you're there helping people, like you're not like racist or discriminatory, and that's kind of just
I know.
not the case.
That is the biggest blind spot. You're so right. Yeah. Everybody listening, please know humanitarians are not inherently good people. Okay.
Right, I don't think
If you're a
so.
professional humanitarian, let's just say that. If you're getting
Right.
money, off of somebody
Yeah.
else's misfortune, you're not necessarily a good person. Broad strokes. Everybody has little good and bad, but yeah, I think you're so right that we can't assume that people somehow are like void of bias
Right.
because they decide to help people. That's just
Right.
ridiculous.
That was my biggest like surprise working at Mercy Corps, was that like that office in Goma had an investigation done there, because like the Congolese people who worked there were like, people are like racist or discriminatory, and I was surprised because I was like, how can you come here like as a foreigner and like be racist or discriminate against black people when you're in an African country and it's all black people, like. And so I think that there's that, and then also for like humanitarians working overseas, sometimes it becomes less about doing something to help the community that you work in, or like the communities you're meant to be helping, and more about the lifestyle that comes with being an expat, working in development,
Mm-hmm.
because it can like be very cushy. Like, maybe your salary is not like super high unless you have a very high position, but the cost of living where you live is going to be very cheap, so you'll barely spend any money. Like, you can afford help, like somebody to help cook, clean, watch your kid. You won't be able to afford that like if you're back in France or Canada or the US. And you get a cost of living allowance a lot of times. Sometimes, depending on your position, you can use the organization one of their cars. So like it does become kind of a
Cushy
cushy
job.
lifestyle. And
Yeah.
I feel like, I mean, from what I've seen, that sometimes the longer somebody's like in that profession, the more it can maybe be about that lifestyle, and the less it is about like the actual work. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that's just like my observation.
Yeah. Um, I think that's true. I think a lot of I've kind of read a few things about like beware of like the rich humanitarian because they're only staying there because they'd be poor if they had to go
And
back
that's so
home.
much true. It's definitely true. Like, if you do
Yeah.
the work overseas like that, like you can save a lot of money, and then like you can go back to your own country having saved a ton and be able to do what you wouldn't have been able to do otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think like that's another important thing to remember. Like, things are not necessarily how they seem. Like, those people who are supposedly working to help others, like they're benefiting too in a pretty big way.
Right. And that's the, main mission of Contrarian Humanitarian is just trying to showcase that, like, look, like I said, I think most of us want to do good things, support our community, wherever that may be. But, like, when it becomes systematized and this system is based on, Western imperialism, there are going to be inherent imbalances. And I think the question you raise is really interesting of like, why would you come to a majority or like a, black country if you're racist? But
Mm-hmm.
I think you could also say is like, of course you might go to that country if you're racist because that system is a racist system and sort of like can pulls you into it again, especially with
Yeah.
this like feelings of good deeds and
Right.
this all of these sort of things we're raised on that like our culture and way of life is superior
Mm-hmm.
than others.
Yeah.
I think we should make okay. I have to really use the bathroom. So can we take just like actually, Mikey, if you want to pop on and talk about what's coming up with Contrarian, and then Portia, if you're still enjoying this conversation, we can talk a little bit more, maybe about IRC.
Sure.
Okay.
Oh yeah, we should definitely.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so all right, let me just give me a few minutes, and then Mike will come on and let everybody know what's going on. Also, just I want to Rana also maybe Portia too, if you want to elaborate on this. Rana, my friend says, unfortunately, the organization image thing extends even to the selection to employees. For example, being a girl could make you rejected if most of the employees are female. If most of the females are not claiming that you will fit in the group. Yeah.
Hmm.
So you're unveil. Oh, sorry, a veiled girl. Okay, my friend Rana wears a hijab. So there's also discrimination with your decision whether to veil or unveil,
Hmm. Hmm.
and the image that people conceive of you, whether you decide to be veiled or not.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
All right, I'll be right back.
Hello. It's good to be back in my station. Erin has usurped my computer. We're going to try and get her back in her station, but we'll see. So, in just 2 days, in about 48 hours, we have a bonus episode which is a part of our pilot podcast series, which is starring yours truly, myself, Mikey P., and my research background in conspiracy theories and the digital age. And the problem with that is something I've been studying for about a decade. So I felt like we should talk about that. And then we have this huge podcast series. It's still in process of being unveiled, but we have a bonus episode on Sunday, 2 p.m. Eastern, live with historian Professor Brendan Fay. And we're going to be discussing an academic article he wrote called The Nazi Conspiracy Theory. It's about the conspiratorial worldview of the Nazis themselves in the historical context of the rise of the Third Reich and the Weimar Republic prior to the Third Reich. And we're also going to be talking about the Capitol riots and what it means, analyzing that, and doing a little bit of discussion about fascism, which has been a bit of a hot topic in scholarly and historian circles about when to use the term, whether it's appropriate to compare, for instance, Trump to Hitler. Is Trumpism fascism? Was the Capitol riots a coup, or was it an insurrection, or something less or more than that, a putsch, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, also episode 4 of the pilot podcast series, which is audio only. We're going to have to, I realize this is confusing and we need to explain this to people, but we have like a audio only pilot series that was originally supposed to be done before we officially started, but then we just kind of jumped into the official live shows, which we're doing now, which is a little bit different format. But episode 4 of the pilot podcast, From Globalist to Globalization, Building Left Movements in the Age of Conspiracy, that is the title. Episode 4 will be coming out. We really encourage you to check that out because it's a good sort of broad introduction to our project and connecting a lot of various ideas about what's going on in the world, not just with conspiracy theories, but also with globalization and global systems of development, which obviously, apply to this show. We're going to try and get Erin back in her station now, I think. I think your mic is going to be muted, so you just click that button. Can you hear me in your headphones?
I can.
Okay.
Did you finish everything you wanted to say, Mikey? Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't realize you were done. All right. Thank you for waiting, everybody. And yeah, tune in on Sunday. All right, Portia.
Yeah.
So where should we start this journey?
With IRC.
Yeah. Would you, okay, why don't we just, because this was your first humanitarian position in the United States, correct? Like international style.
Right.
So the title of the show, Being a Black Woman in Development, how did, these things start to shift once you got to the U.S. and the office dynamics within the U.S.?
Well, for me coming in, so the first thing that kind of struck me was how, because in the Francophone system, like there is a clear hierarchy, and like you must follow that hierarchy. Like there's no, you know, if you have a problem with your supervisor, there's no skipping to the person above them. And like everything like you're doing, like are expected to notify like your supervisor of what you're doing. So the first thing that I kind of was looking forward to a little bit was not having like such a that kind of strict structure. And like I found that refreshing, but then also I found it frustrating because it seems in some ways like, okay, I found I found it refreshing, but I found it frustrating because in instances where, you know, somebody like who you're managing would have an issue, and instead of saying something to you, would say something to the person above you, and then that person wouldn't say like, no, you have to like follow the hierarchy and you should talk to your direct supervisor first. Like working, like my previous positions, like that would never happen. And like that was one thing coming and working in the US, like at an IRC in Denver. That was something that really like frustrated me. I found it difficult to, you know, it's difficult to like build trust and a cohesive team when people are just kind of jumping all over, you know? And then I hadn't thought about like anything that could happen really regarding race. Like that's something that I really just like very rarely think about until it is happening or it's happened. So that wasn't something that was really in my head, but I was thinking, you know, like the office was diverse. I mean, there are people from like different countries. So I thought it was going to be cool to work there. There wouldn't be any kind of those, you know, like issues probably with discrimination and racism. Like how could there be when your office is multicultural? And it turns out that that's not the case. Yeah.
Definitely not. This is, you know, why in the blog, if people haven't read it, International Racist Committee, check it out on contrarianhumanitarian.org. This, this is one of the things I talk about in the blog is identity politics. Not identity politics, that's just sort of like the buzzword to talk about it. But, you know, the diversity, equity, inclusion teams that are now being built, to be cautious of these teams that are being built, because we know that just replacing, you know, just making it more racially, ethnically diverse doesn't always equate to equality and justice and, you know, these types of values that you would hope to have, you know, that you want in a humanitarian system. So we just have to be cautious. And I think we need to look at, I mean, the employees definitely need to be kind of predominantly of the population served. But we also have to check people's mindsets too, and kind of where they are and what their framework is for how they think, you know, services should be delivered. You know, what is their perception? So something to be cautious of, you know, not to say that like I'm advocating for an all white office, because I'm certainly not. I'm just saying that, you know, there are multiple things that we need to be looking into here.
Right.
So I'll also say that in my previous work experience, I've never also had the experience of people being able to talk above you, not to you, if they have issues with you. And this is a big thing. I mean, I think that personally and professionally, this is some kind of a rule of thumb people should go by, is that if you have an issue with somebody, you should go to that person to talk about it. And I think people don't, because it's easier to not go to that person. But when you don't, it creates an inherent distrust kind of, because for me, the automatic question is, well, why did you feel like you couldn't come and talk to me?
Right.
When okay, so this is also important. We've talked about this before. Even when we told management that would like people to come to us if they have an issue rather than them, if they could please relay that if something happens again, and then don't, that creates a toxic work environment.
Yeah, it definitely does, because then there's no trust between management and everybody else. So if you're in middle management, you're supervising just a team, then that creates a lack of trust between you and the people you're supervising, and now a lack of trust between you and the person above you, and it makes it difficult to get things done that way and to be effective that way.
Right, because you have no idea what's going on. Because if your team is talking to somebody above you and that, they're communicating and you're left out, and then, you look like the idiot. And it puts you in a bad position that I think if the office management is out to get you for whatever reason, they can easily kind of point to well, you didn't know this or something. It's well, the reason I didn't know this is because I was completely left out of the conversation, and nobody purposefully told me. And how would I even know about it until now? When did you think I think we both, you knew something was afoot before me. You got there before me. You were being mistreated before me. And I could see that, but I didn't, know the full extent. When you started feeling something's not right, something's happening, did you think it had anything to, what did you think it had to do with?
I thought maybe I'm not, because I was told oh, the people on your team don't feel comfortable coming to you about things, and that's why they're coming to me. This is what my supervisor said to me, and so I was thinking well, I must not be doing a good job, but the more I thought about it, she hadn't said that. And then the more I thought about it, the people on my team, would always come to me with things. Sometimes even things that had nothing to do with, our job. So I had thought it was just, maybe it was because I, wasn't doing a good job. And was so then trying to focus more on just doing better. But it's hard to do that when you don't see even what the issue is, you know what I mean? If someone is just well, your team doesn't trust you and blah blah blah, and then you ask, well, what can I do better? And the supervisor says, well, I don't know.
It doesn't answer you, doesn't give you
answer. Then it's hard to know what to do. And I didn't realize that it might be something else until actually you one day were said, well, do you notice that, our supervisor, do you notice that she's treating you differently than she's treating me? And that's when it kind of clicked a little bit for me that it wasn't that I wasn't doing a good job. It was obviously something else. That had more to do with her than it had to do with me. So yeah, and I had also had a comment from somebody else who was on my team who said, who saw what was happening and suggested that it was because I was speaking up a lot about things that I saw that maybe weren't weren't what they should be, and also because I'm Black. And I mean, I hadn't thought that like before, like you and then this other person had brought that up.
And this is when I think like our earlier conversation about like white people from the US working with Black people from the US versus Black people from other countries. I think this is like, because to be honest, this was the first time I really ever saw this, because I don't think I've worked with another Black American in this setting before. And so it's really the first time I saw like these dynamics playing out. And I tried to figure out like, you know, what was, I don't know if it's just because like maybe they're from places that lack diversity, you know, or like, again, this like perceived level of threat, which I think comes from, you know, ingrained racist culture. Mm-hmm. But it was definitely clear that like you were getting, you know, the brunt of the bullshit. And it didn't, and it's like you hadn't even been there long enough to get any of the criticism that was like really coming your way, you know? Right. And another thing I want to point out is just like, if anybody is in an office position, please do not tell your person that quote unquote people are saying, and then not give them any specifics, and then not follow up on how to, you know, troubleshoot those issues, because that's just a bunch of bullshit. And anybody that says people are saying, that's a crock of shit. That means they're saying it. They just don't have the balls to tell you that that's how they feel about you.
Right. And at least like if you have a criticism, like have an actual concrete criticism, not just something like, you know, oh, well, it's something I can't put my finger on it. Like, no, that's not helping anybody. Like, that's not helping the person who you're supposed to be giving this constructive criticism to. And it's not helping like the people that they're working with. So like have something, you know, concrete at least. And to me, if you come with some kind of like vague criticism like that, that means that you don't actually have anything. Like you're just making things up.
Right. Because if you had a legitimate criticism, it's coming from somewhere. Like this happened, so then I can talk to you about this specifically. Right. But if I'm just like broad stroking it and you're like, well, kind of, can you tell me like a little bit, you know, a little bit more, like when did this happen or whatever? And then they just draw a blank, you know. That means that they're
prepared to that meeting, or they really like just don't have anything.
Yeah. So months of undergoing this, you know, kind of vague harassment, making you feel like it's your fault, different things. And then, you know, no level of correction given. And so very difficult to like, you know, in the blog, we're talking about like no evidence presented, right? And so let's say management sees this and they're like, oh, well, we could give you some evidence. Here are these emails, da, 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 da. But let's just talk about, again, like the vagueness and this kind of thing and what happens as an employee. Because this is, you know, this is very problematic. And I just want to like give warning to people that are in large international institutions like this and about HR. HR, I did not found to be my friend in these and you know, facing like the harassment and speaking my mind about what was going on at the office. Yeah, so now I'm getting all emotional and losing a train of thought. But what was my original question to you about?
When did I realize that maybe something was happening? But I would just like to say about HR, like you finding HR wasn't your friend. I think that just goes back to the fact that, like these large international organizations, like they want to protect their interests first, you know, before the interests of their employees or even necessarily the people who they're supposed to be helping. So, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing was disgusting with the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. And, you had been fired without evidence, just in that whole situation. And then to have them just sending these emails, Black Lives Matter, this and that. And it's like, just it was clear that it was just like word vomit. And it was like, this is what we're supposed to say. And I do think, yes, okay, they care about other people. But when it comes down to it, when they're showing their actions on a day-to-day basis, they don't care. They're not showing that they care.
Right.
And so all of this talk about racial justice just like went in one ear and out the other with me, because it was clear from their own actions. And I had, brought it up so many times, like, how could you fire someone so qualified just like that, And also, I would also like to point out that both Portia and I, other people, two people in my previous position, were not from Colorado. We had to move very far across the country. And, I just don't understand how you could just decide to fire somebody within a year after they've moved there. Hey, Dejuan, nice to see you. So yeah.
I think like part of it was, at that office, like, there were a lot of procedural things that should have been in place and were not, like, for probably more than a year. And so things were just kind of pell-mell. And I think when I started, what I hadn't realized, and I wish like would have just been said to me up front, was, okay, we expect for you to like fix this year's worth of like accumulated issues, starting right now as soon as you start. Because it seemed to me like that was the main reason that I was fired, was that she, like, our supervisor was like, oh, well, you should have done all these things, like fixed all these issues after only 4 months, when everybody knows, like, you start a new job, it takes like 2 months to even learn what your job really is. And like, to fix this year's worth of issues,
multi-years worth of issues,
right, when it was her who had been in charge for all that time, and she could have, presumably, if she had been doing her job, like, prevented those issues from even happening.
Right.
And just, like, to me, it was kind of unrealistic. Like, how can I, like, maybe if I had transferred from another office in that organization, I knew how things worked already, so I could just immediately start. But you can't expect somebody to fix, like, a year's worth of crap in 4 months. It's not possible. And so I wonder if, like, when I was kind of making these changes within my team, trying to like make things more streamlined, to have a more cohesive team, and for us all to be able to actually do our job better without like these issues continually coming up. I wonder if she just like, I think sometimes people like see somebody else is doing something that they should have been doing all along. And then like, especially like in our case, like just become like resentful of that or threatened by that. Yeah, I don't know. But I think, that does sometimes happen if somebody is in like a little bit of a higher position and they see people, lower than them are doing good things and are like making positive changes. And then they're thinking like, they know, like they should have been doing that themselves. Then that can become problematic when it really shouldn't be, like, all working together as part of one big team. So it shouldn't matter really who is doing like what, That's just what I was thinking.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think, again, threat. I think that there's a level of threat perceived due to insecurity. You know, yeah, what you're saying, when somebody comes on and they're like, you know, I have this experience, I, you know, want to do this and that. If you had wanted to do those things and you're coming from an insecure place, you're going to squash those things rather than be positive and helpful and be like, yeah, I've always wanted to do that. Let's do it together. Da, 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 you know, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there so many things, you know, maybe I guess for people that maybe are not aware, refugee resettlement, I've talked about it a few times, but refugee resettlement is, you know, an international system essentially where people that have fled conflict can apply for, you know, essentially, this is long story short, people that have fled conflict or living in a different country now can essentially apply for refugee status. And then, you know, less than 1% of people are able to resettle to a third location. And those are typically Australia, the United States, and like some European countries. And the president sets the president of the United States for the United States sets the ceiling of how many refugees are allowed in the United States each year. And then these resettlement agencies essentially provide services as soon as people get off the plane till up to 5 years, depending on, you know, what contracts they've got going on. And just providing people or getting people set up with housing and social services and food services and healthcare services and education and different things like that when people get here. So that's broadly what refugee resettlement is. And that's where Portia and I met. Yeah, I don't know if we want to get into any like critiques of the resettlement system or anything about that, if you have any.
I think one of the biggest things that I saw was that it felt like a lot of the times the people that we worked with, like clients who we were helping get set up, get their lives started in the US, we would treat them as if, you know, they were children and they like didn't know anything and they wouldn't be able to just figure certain things out on their own. And we weren't giving them like as much responsibility over certain things that as we should have been doing, especially with, you know, money, I don't know, just different things like that, but especially with money and or even like, you know,
their own documents and stuff.
Yeah, their own documents, their own, you know, getting like social services, you know, having to renew those kind of things, or, you know, even transportation. I mean, I felt like we were treating them like they wouldn't be able to some extent figure those things out for themselves, and that in the long run, it hurt a lot of them because every time like something would come up, then they would be looking to us for help because we had just been doing things for them and not showing them how to do things themselves. And that's one of the things like for the economic empowerment team, like I really wanted to get away from, like, because what was happening before I got on was that like people on the team were applying for jobs for them, for clients. And it like, no, like we can show them, this is where you look for jobs. This is like what you do to apply. Like we can help them and walk them through it, but they need to do it themselves. Not like they're at home and we're in the office doing their applications. That how are they gonna know? Because inevitably one day they're gonna want to leave that job and they won't necessarily know now what to do to get a new job. And also like just oftentimes in their communities, like there are so many connections that they could use. And I feel like we weren't really using that to the fullest extent to the benefit of the clients. And I found it really like hurtful for the clients because then something would happen and they would feel like they didn't know what to do themselves, when often like it was something that they could have figured out themselves, or that they could have probably just asked somebody in their community. But it start to feel like we were like their life raft, and it shouldn't to me, it shouldn't be like that. So that would be my biggest criticism, I think, of resettlement.
I think, yeah, you bring up a lot of good points. The paternalism that happens, again, with people thinking like they know what's best and treat people. This is something that I always tried to, like, whenever I see people speaking to somebody in this way, I always try to correct it, because it's incredibly rude when you have, I don't even care who it is, but especially, you know, if it's an elder person and you're speaking to them like a child, and it's like, I don't care what, you know, what language, whatever, you're not speaking to somebody like that. Absolutely not, you know, like, so there's definite that. I think that's something that needs to be talked about across the board in humanitarian sectors is, you know, how just because you speak a different language doesn't mean that you need to speak slow or like kind of be so exaggeratory that it's dramatic and absurd, you know, and impolite or rude. The other thing that I think is really important that you talked about is how when people are first coming to this country, refugee resettlement, like we see people as soon as they get off the plane, you know, and like obviously they have their preconceived notions of what the United States and our systems are going to be like, but essentially we're the first people that they're meeting. And so what I think we say matters, and our, you know, information of what we're presenting about America and its systems is incredibly important. And particularly like, because it is so full of white people, white women, we need to especially like call into question these belief systems when, you know, after George Floyd died and the office was talking about different racial justice issues, one of the things that was brought up was, I heard somebody say, I don't even want to talk about police officers, or I'm not even going to tell people to call the cops anymore, which is a conversation to be had because we work with largely Black and brown people. But I was just like, absolutely not. You can't not tell people about the police. You know what I mean? Just because you as a white person, you know, have like, it's a complicated conversation for sure. But we can't just say, you know, I'm not going to tell these people about the police. But instead, it's like we need to have a fuller conversation about what the police are. Oh, and what can happen. Not just so. Again, I'm saying all of this because resettlement workers are kind of the first people to talk to people in the United States coming in as refugees, and you know, our practices matter. So,
Right.
Another thing too about setting people up for success in terms of social services and teaching people how to do it on their own. I definitely found that to be true at our office. I was pretty pissed about a lot of different things. Like we were still getting so many clients' mail. And I'm just like, dude, they have a mailbox. Teach them how to get their own mail. Like, this is ridiculous.
I don't know if that's something that was just happening at IRC, because I know like at least one other resettlement agency here in Denver, like people, they get their own mail, you know, even like regarding social services and public benefits, like they get their own mail. I don't know like quite why at IRC that wasn't happening, but yeah, that was another thing. Like they can get their own mail, and then if they need help with it, with, you know, reapplying for public benefits or anything like that, they don't understand. They know that we're here. They can call and they can ask, but you know, like they're not babies. Like they can get it and see. But I think there was always kind of like this fear of, oh, like, but they might like mess up. They might mess it up, or, you know, oh, they might not know.
It's easier.
Yeah, it's easier. And I mean, anybody who has kids knows, like, you can't like do every single thing for your child like forever, because at some point you're gonna get tired and you're gonna be like, I'm sorry, you need to like learn how to fix your own meals and wash your own clothes and, you know, wipe your own butt, like all of the things. And it just seems like for like resettlement, at least at IRC, at least in Denver, like we never kind of got past, there was just like always like this kind of like concern, oh, they won't know what to do, oh, we have to do it, oh, it's easier. So a concern between making it easier for us, like the people in the office, and like, oh, they won't know what to do. And I mean, it's not your job to make things easier for you, like, first of all, and that like in the resettlement field, your job is to make sure that like these people know how to do things for themselves in the US. And so the other worry of, oh, they won't know what to do. I mean, so what? They'll come and they'll ask, or they'll mess up, and then, you know, that's okay. That's how people learn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think people somehow take it personally if like a client messes up or something the first time they do something. It's just like, we don't need to always take it so personal. And it's not such a like representation of us. It's like, you know, this is a like, try again, you know, but I just think, yeah, we put so much weight on it and like, you know, want to pat ourselves back on the back so much from like showing somebody how to use their own mailbox or whatever. Like, I think one thing about the resettlement system that kind of upsets me is that it's still like an international development humanitarian sphere. But what we do in the US a lot is like what social workers do, what social services here do in the US, you know, just like help navigate people to certain resources that they need. And so many people think that like, including management, thinks that what we do versus what social workers do, like in the US to US population, is so different. Like, oh, they can't do our job. And that's not true. And like, I think also we need to kind of professionalize what we do to sort of decolonize as a way of decolonizing what we're doing, like the paternalistic behavior. Like, because I've been in social services spaces where there's an American professional talking to, you know, their American client, and they're not talking in the same way in this kind of like paternalistic fashion. They're talking as like, you know, we're just two people. I'm just trying to provide you a service. You know, we're here. I'm here to help or whatever. But I understand that you are an equal, and I think we need more professionalization in the refugee resettlement sector to try to decolonize some of our behaviors around service provision and how we talk to people, and just kind of get out of this idea that like, you know, oh, it's, you know, I can't tell you how many times I've had so many people come in any resettlement office I've worked in and be like, oh, people, you know, they just been through so much and this and that, and I just want to do all of these things for them. And it's like, yes, you need to take people's lived experiences seriously and respect people for what they've been through. But that means respecting them as a fully creative, resourceful, and whole person. Yes, from our training. But really hold people that way and not, you know, constantly see people as, you know, objects for your benefit almost. It's gross.
Yeah. It did seem like sometimes it was more about, for certain people, less about like helping the client and more about like making themselves feel good for what they were supposedly doing for the client. And yeah, I mean, that is gross because first of all, that client didn't ask you to like do all those extra things, you know, like they want help, but you know, they want help like mostly learning how to do things. So that definitely was something that I found kind of like, ugh, like, why are you doing that? Yeah. I don't know. I was gonna say something else, but then I forgot.
It's okay. I've done that multiple times today where I'm like, oh, I'm on the brink. No, I lost it.
But I was glad that training that you were just saying, that of thinking of people as, what was it, creative, resourceful, and whole. So I was glad that we did that training and that was kind of the focus of it, because that was definitely something that I saw was lacking, like in our office, like not trusting clients enough to feel that, yes, like you can do this on your own. But then at the same time for that training, I felt like people walked away and still
continued on what they were doing.
yes,
Yeah.
continued doing the things that they were doing that were not correct. And what you were saying about how, people would be like, oh, they've been through so much, like, I just really want to help them. I found it surprising that people didn't think more in the sense of, like, this person has been through so much. Like, they're obviously a very strong, resourceful, capable person if they're able to get through that and make it here.
Right.
Like, I was surprised that wasn't where people's minds went first. That the first place their mind went was like, oh, this person, like, is now kind of, like, helpless,
Yeah, it's like, to use my dad's one of his favorite expressions, like, you think this is their first rodeo? Like, they've...
Yeah.
Someone with this lived experience, like, this is, unfortunately, they're familiar with how to navigate confusion and, new spaces and circumstances, because they would have had to have fled their first country and moved to another country. And, oftentimes there's more countries that they've moved to by the time they get to the US or wherever. And obviously these are very strong, resilient individuals. So yeah, always coming at it from such like a pitying angle is disturbing. And you see a lot of that in this type of sector, so especially with like volunteers come in and they're just like, I want to, especially after like a big thing like the European migrant crisis in 2015 was great in some ways because it raised so much awareness about, immigrant rights, migrant rights. But it also, at least like fueled a certain level of like pity or misunderstanding, which maybe is part and parcel for how our media portrays these events and people. It's not entirely like the person themselves' fault, but yeah. Well, we've talked for like 2 hours now about all sorts of things. And I guess, we can close and you can say some final thoughts. I do just want to add, since we're talking about refugee resettlement and Biden is the president now, he had agreed to raising the refugee ceiling to 125,000. And I want to mobilize humanitarian sector workers to, holding him to that, but also meaning that we need increased services and we need a push for universal programming because places like IRC, for example, have a lot of board members who are part of Big Pharma and Big Wall Street who essentially don't believe in handouts. Not that it's a handout. We actually just deserve that money, especially with the pandemic or when people are falling on hard times. We need robust social safety net that helps us. So I would like to mobilize all humanitarian workers to not just say, yes, we need more, people to come to the United States, but we need to mobilize for effective services across the board, because I'm really tired of, people have such high hopes and they can make certain dreams come true and people come to the United States for various reasons. But I'm really sick of this idea of like, allowing people to have this, to not allowing people to live the life in the United States that they thought that they were going to live. And that means increasing and expanding social services for everybody across the board. So we can align with, all sorts of people who are providing these same services that we are on an international scale. Anyway, I just think that we need to be pushing for, again, universal increased programming across the board, regardless of where you're from or anything like that. So we as humanitarian workers need to be thinking about that. So, yeah. And do you have anything you would like to say?
I think just for humanitarian workers, just to be mindful of the prejudices and the preconceptions that you're going into your work with, because if you're at least mindful of them, then you won't I hope, be letting those things get in the way of you actually being effective in your job and being more respectful of the people that you're supposed to be assisting.
Yeah, be someone of character, question your own intentions, your own colonized mind. And I think we should all, especially us pale folk, should, we need to be talking about, racial justice, but we need to be talking about it appropriately, correctly, talking to people, brave people such as yourself, sharing their experiences of all the intricacies of what it means to be a Black woman, of what it means to be a Black woman in international development, and how we're treating people across the board. These are things that we definitely need to be aware of as we move forward. And again, like be somebody
in a concrete way, not like aware of, oh, we're just going to talk about it and then we all go back to doing what we were already doing. I think that there needs to be a lot more accountability, like in the humanitarian and development sector of, just organizations being more accountable for what they're doing in communities. Because even in the US, organizations like IRC and other resettlement agencies, I don't think are as accountable to their communities, not only the refugee community, but like the community at large as they should be.
Definitely. And I think part of that is this guise that we've talked about that humanitarian employees and organizations operate under, that they can sort of do no wrong. But as we're talking about, there's, the systems are sort of built of racism. There's racism at all levels, office level, macro level. And yeah, we need to hold people accountable. And we need to be thinking about, again, like in the blog post, we need to be thinking about what are we asking our employers and what do we want to see? I'm someone that really wants to look into reparations and restitutions, and because I think development funds are essentially funds that have been stolen from exploitative colonial practices and taken all of those resources and then, trying to get, barely giving them back to the countries in sort of this crazy development fashion, where I think we just should reimburse people for all of the atrocities caused. It's a bigger conversation, but I think, to your point, we need to have these questions. How are we going to hold these institutions accountable? What are we looking for? And mobilize together. So, well, thank you so much, Portia, for doing this. I loved having you on. Thank you so much for sharing your story and all of your insights. And I'll have to have you back on again because it's been 2 hours and we didn't get to, all the community work that you're starting to do here.
Oh,
because humanitarian efforts can be anywhere, y'all. So
in your own backyard.
Yes. Yeah.
Well,
so we'll have to have you on.
This is fun.
Good. Yeah, well, we'll definitely have you back on again. And, if people want to find you, ask you questions, how can they find you?
I don't have a bunch of social media handles. But, I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn, so you can find me there. Portia Washington. There's not very many, so easy to find. Yeah. And wait, can I just say one thing real quick about?
Yeah.
And then also, I'm co-founder of an organization, Wealth 228, that provides financial education to the African American community, specifically in Denver. So if you're interested in knowing more about that, you can email us at infowealth228@gmail.com.
Exactly. Nice. Thank you for plugging that. Yeah. So that's what we'll have you on next time to talk about, because that's important, such important work. So
yeah.
Sorry, Mike's phone's ringing. Oh, and also my sister says, so great to be able to listen. And Portia, it was nice to put a face to a name and hear your story. Aaron speaks highly of you.
Oh, that's so nice.
Yeah. I don't talk shit about my friends behind their back. All right. Well, everybody, you can find this episode on our YouTube channel, and it'll also be on our contrarianhumanitarian.org site, so you can check it out there. And Portia told y'all where you can find her and her new organization that is doing great community work with the African American community in Denver. So, snaps to that. All right. Well, I'll talk to you later. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Erin. Bye. Bye, Mikey.
Bye.
Yay! Episode 3 live done, y'all. We out. Thank you so much again to Portia Washington and to my main man, master producer, Mike UP, always helping me out with my technological insufficiencies.
Yeah, no problem. Just want to go ahead and plug also one more thing. Looking a little bit into the future, we're going to have author, economist, and historian Eric Chester on to look at a little bit of the way back history of the IRC, including their connections to the Central Intelligence Agency and their covert activities in the past. Yeah.
Yeah, so stay tuned for that. So, because we're going to get real into International Racist Committee soon with Eric Thomas Chester. So stay tuned for that. All right. We good?
Yeah, wrap it up.
All right. Bye, y'all.